Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. The government launched the Make in India initiative, which aims at promoting India as an investment destination and to establish India as a global hub for manufacturing, design and innovation. The initiative aims to provide congenial environment to the business community so that they can devote their effort, resources and energy in productive work. A number of steps have been taken by the government to improve ease of doing business. Rules and procedures have been simplified and a number of products have been taken off licensing requirements. On this edition of The Big Picture, we'll analyze what some of the biggest challenges of this initiative are. Join me on the program today are Subhomoy, Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor of the Business Standard. Also with me on the program, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Member NIPFP. And S.K. Sarkar, Chairman, Economic Affairs Committee, or I beg your pardon, Managing Committee Member, ASSOCHAM, is also with me here on the program. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me on the program. Subhomoy, I'd like to start with you. Has the Make in India initiative really achieved what it's supposed to have achieved thus far?
Achievement is a very big word in the sense that this is a program which actually is a long-term phase-in program.
So it's still work in progress.
We are at the stage, where it's the stage where the parts need to be fitted in. Manufacturing in India has actually been shrinking. Now, if you start out with that as the base, then the point is what needs to be done to make manufacturing actually start reviving. To do that, one of the components is to change the rules for doing business, which is basically being talked of as the ease of doing business rules. The second is action on the ground in terms of what the states are able to do in terms of what they offer the investors. And third, what happens with the manufacturers who are already established in India and have problems or advantages which one would like to sort as one goes through. So if you look at it there, the first easy hanging fruit is changing the rules, the ease of doing business rules. So within the Make in India, that is the one which the central government has sort of tapped into. It's also something which the state governments have tapped into, because those do not, in most cases, require change of legislation. So those are the ones which have actually, you'd have seen a lot of traction this year. The reports that came out, the discussions over them, those are the easier ones to work on. That has been done. The second part of it, which is that what do you do about the state governments actually being able to offer concrete investment ideas and policy and regulations which make it interesting for them to do. That part we are coming into now. And of them, the most critical one is the one which has just started, which is the reform in the electricity sector, the UDAY. Now, UDAY is at stage where the states are just signing up to say we agree that the electricity board's dues over the next 3 years, we will take up 75% of those, ask the banks to take request the banks to take a haircut and make electricity tariffs much more what I might call practical between the agriculture and industrial sector. So that is something that will unfold in the next few months in terms of what the states actually do. The third part of it, which is the balance sheet problem of the companies which are already there, settling those out, which is commonly being referred to as the NPA problem or the bad debt problem. That is the most difficult problem of all, because that involves companies, actually each company doing specific things to ensure that they get those the bad things out of their books, take hit where it is necessary, allow the shareholders more say in terms of what needs to be done at the management level, weeding out management. This is a very difficult thing in India.
Yes.
Management which doesn't really perform. It doesn't really happen so easily in India. Those sort of steps, those would be the third part. So that is how I look at the Make in India.
Indeed. And what challenges do you see, Professor Bhanumurthy, as far as the Make in India initiative is concerned?
Yeah. The major objective of Make in India, if you look at, is to increase the share of manufacturing sector to 25%,
yes,
which is currently at 16% or 17%. That itself suggests it is a very long-term plan of the government to increase the share of manufacturing sector. So what takes manufacturing to 25%? I would say there are 4 I's and 1 S: infrastructure, investments, innovation, and intellectual property right, and the skilled labor. So these 5 aspects of Make in India it will take a long time. So we are not really, as Subhomoy already pointed out, we are not talking about achievement. Have we started Make in India? I think that's where we are at that moment. Any of these 5 aspects, all are long-term ambitions. It will take much more time than what the analysts really looking for. Having said that, the biggest challenge that you asked is that the biggest challenge is there is general impression that has been created here right now. Make in India is for foreign investors. Okay, and if you look at, you must have heard some of the dissent voices saying that Make in India for India, something like that from the RBI governor himself. So I think it is not just for the foreign direct investment alone. It is also for the domestic investors to be part of this overall global expansion, the Indian expansion, which we are trying to increase the share of manufacturing from 16 to 25%. In that sense, I'm not really sure, again, as Subhomoy already actually touched the crux of the issue about the balance sheets.
Yes.
We are not sure the domestic industry is really ready for taking that challenge. And again, this is not new. In fact, we have heard these kind of things in the beginning of the reforms itself. The fear of foreign competition. Okay, so the fear of foreign competition seems to be coming back in the minds of domestic investors. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we see, even if there is a decline in the interest rates by the central bank, we are not seeing the recovery in the investment cycle. There is no clarity on where the foreign investors are going to come, where the government is attracting foreign investment, in which sector. Those things have not been really made clear so that the domestic investors can start investing in other sectors.
Indeed. Something that he pointed out, Mr. Sarkar, very interestingly, is that domestic industries, are they willing to take up this challenge?
Well, let's go back to what the government is trying to do. You see, the government has honest intentions, to be fair to them. They have come up with schemes like Make in India, they have Skill India, then they have the Smart Cities, Digital India, Jan Dhan Yojana, Swachh Bharat, and bullet trains, Bharat Mala, whatever. I mean, so they got everything there. What is my fear or my scare is that these are all standalone schemes. They're pretty disjointed. They're not joined together. I'll give you an example. I mean, if you look at bullet trains, now fine, you have the foreign trade policy which came on 1st April 2015, which covers the period 2015 to 2020. Now it says that JICA related projects would not be entitled to the deemed export status. Now that means that the supplies go up by something like 20%.
Yes.
Because obviously the duty drawback and everything will not come into play at all. Now when you do, but World Bank and ADB projects still remain under the deemed exports scheme. Now if you have such a thing and if you have a scheme, you are announcing a policy which is actually working against a scheme which is to be formulated by the government. So that's where you get into a little bit of issues. And obviously there's a lot of red tapeism, there's the bureaucracy is playing its role. Now you have the National Skill Development Corporation, which has been targeted to provide jobs for 150 million people. They've actually done for only 5.1 million people, and only 1.5 million people have been placed. If you have things like that, then it becomes a very, very difficult task. Mr. Bhattacharjee referred to NPAs. Now, when you look at NPAs, the balance sheet items, when you look at, yes, we have something like $60 billion of NPAs right now, which is staring us in the face. But when you come up with this SDRs, the strategic debt restructuring, what happens is there's a possibility that you are forcing the companies to merge into one another. And world over today, if you look at the global economics, if the mergers have actually not played the role that they should have played, they have become dominant players. They have actually cut down on employment. They have actually brought down the economic activity to a considerable extent. We are not in that stage. We are in a takeoff stage. We are a developing economy. We want to be a superpower, an economic superpower in the next 10 years or so. Now, that being so, we are not really taking off in the manner which we should be doing. We talk about tax terrorism. Whenever we talk about tax terrorism, we do it vis-a-vis the foreign investors. We don't talk about domestic tax terrorism. I'll give you an example here again. If you look at the Finance Act of 2015, it suddenly at the last stage, it was never at the discussion stage at any stage at all. They came up with a definition of income which included subsidies and grants and concessions. The purpose test was totally lost sight of. Now, if you do a thing like that and say that any kind of subsidy that you get without looking at the purpose for which it has been given, then other than what is given for an asset, it will be an income. Now, did you put it for discussion before in the public domain? Did you discuss it in the parliament? You never did that. Now, when you do things like that, that is where the scare, I think, actually expands. You have a large. I mean, people are not very confident. And today, let me say this as far as the domestic industry is concerned, the capacity utilization today is roughly speaking, average is around 65 to 70%, which means you have not even got to 100%. So the capital investment does not come in at this juncture at all. And then, of course, like Professor Saab said, that we have very highly leveraged companies in this country. We do not have the capital. Now, these leveraged companies, they're not even able to meet their interest payouts. If that being so, and if you look at the BSE 200 top companies or even the NSE top 50 companies, you will find that the profit margins are coming down and not going up. So the business confidence today is totally lacking. I mean, it is something where, I mean, the businessman today is unfortunately living for the day.
How do you build this confidence?
We build the confidence by putting in the capital, obviously the government has front-loaded the capital investment, I must say, in their favor. They put in something like 1.5 lakh crores already, which is a good thing. But then if you look at the projects, the infrastructure projects, if I can break it up, 295 infrastructure projects of 150 crores or more are actually stalled. I mean, they're delayed. And if they are delayed, so there are cost overruns. The utility value is lost because the present value of what I could have got, I'm not getting. And unless and until this particular infrastructure is built up, we would not get the confidence back again. And if you're talking about the confidence, let me say this again, that we talk about private wealth, we talk about public wealth. Private wealth is always very well managed by the fund managers, not so the public wealth. If you look at your public wealth itself, IMF says that you have about $77 trillion of public wealth globally. If you were to manage that the way the private wealth is managed, you would have something like $2.70 trillion per annum. And that is more than what you need for building up your infrastructure projects.
Indeed. Subhomoy, capital is a major problem. And, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning itself, ease of doing business. India, as we all know, is not considered to be a very easy country to do business with. And we've seen, history has told us that India is not a good country to do business with. So where is this capital flow really going to come from?
Well, capital, I mean, it's actually tautological. I mean, if it's an easy place to do business, capital comes in. So let's look at it this way. Is it the shortage of capital that is holding up Make in India? I don't think so. I think the point is the lack of investment opportunities. As Bhanu pointed out, the lack of investment opportunities is coming because, and here I think the first thing that we need to see is the Make in India is not just about helping business. It is about creating jobs in India. That is the reason. In the first iteration of reforms, frankly speaking, while there have been plenty of great companies that we managed to build up in the public and the private sector, there are lots of other companies which, as Mr. Sarkar pointed out, got themselves leveraged. And they got it leveraged because of cheap capital. Now, for instance, we have debt and equity market. How many of these companies which had the opportunity tapped the equity market? Equity market brings in more discipline.
Yes.
Leverage debt from the bank is much more easy to generate. Now, having generated that, it's unfair for them to say that, we have got highly leveraged. Sure, the business cycle has turned the other way and you've got bad debt on your books. But then that wasn't something which, if you had equity more, you would have actually been much more alert and responsive to market demand and you would have moved accordingly. You didn't. You waited and kept on betting on that the RBI will be basically changing the interest rate structure to help the company do well. It is, I think, playing with the country's scarce capital, which you're talking about. Now, that is something which is often a problem or ease of doing business. That a capital goes into wrong areas. And in a country, and let me look at it another way. Labor in India, we are where labor intensive should be labor intensive economy. We are the most capital intensive economy in one of the world. One of the most capital intensive economy in the world. Why does it happen? Because capital is cheaper in India than labor. The pressure, I agree that labor reforms was difficult, but instead of, if we had actually taken several amount of difficult steps in terms of, going in for equity and all those things, probably we would have had much more traction on labor reforms because companies and the government would have been forced to act. Nobody acted on. And therefore, we have got a situation where we don't add any jobs. In the last 1 year, we have just added 5 lakh jobs against a combined requirement of at least, even by going by ILO estimate, of 8 million jobs a year. So if I were a policymaker, I would actually be more scared about, rather than taking out the company's problems, I would rather be looking at ways to pull that capital to create jobs where it is there. And it doesn't really matter who is able to create the job, so long as the job gets created. Whether it's getting created or not, that's a point, but that I think is the fundamental problem. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge for Make in India.
Job creation, the biggest challenge for Make in India. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think in the Make in India, apart from the 25% target, I think providing opportunity for 16 million new laborers entering into the labor market is one of the biggest challenges. That's one of the reasons why we want to shift from service-led growth to the manufacturing-led growth. So that is the whole crux of the point. Otherwise, we could continue to do this service-led growth because we know that that's a job. The service-led growth is more of a jobless kind of a growth. So that's definitely a crux of the issue. But my problem is when they identified 25 sectors under the Make in India, there are so many sectors that has been identified. I think it's very important for the government to analyze which sector has more labor absorption, And once you identify that, as Subhomoy pointed out, shift the capital or give priority to those sectors where labor absorption is very high. I think that kind of analysis that needs to be done, before we get into a road shows and all those things. I'm not really sure whether this kind of analysis has been done at the government level. In terms of finance, I think I slightly disagree with Mr. Sarkar because all these programs, they are actually enablers for Make in India. You talk about Uday, you talk about Jan Dhan scheme. Jan Dhan is nothing but financial access. Financial access is the biggest problem for the manufacturing sector in this country. Right now, the financial resource gap in this manufacturing sector is nearly 40%. They are not mobilizing from the formal financial process. So I think financial access, Jan Dhan scheme, Digital India is supposed to improve the ease of doing business. So all these things are enablers. Okay, but that is another point. The other point is like if you take a textbook example of production function, we basically look for capital, labor, right, land, okay, energy. You take out of all these 4, we have all problems in all the 4 inputs. You take labor, it's a state subject, not many states have cleared. Land, we're in a mess. Energy, we're again in a mess. Capital, we know that there's a huge gap. So if you don't address these 4 components, okay, we are not going to have a takeoff. I mean, we will crawl, but we will not have a takeoff to 25%.
No, that's a very valid point that you're making. We need to address those problems in those 4 sectors first, or those 4 components, and only then will we see Make in India really take off, Mr. Sarkar.
You see, 91, when we embraced globalization, unfortunately, we we were actually, the focus was on capital intensive industries rather than the labor intensive industries. And we may blame for China for whatever their policies are and however they function. But China in 78, when they started off, they actually looked at agriculture first and then they looked at industries. So why did they look at agriculture first? The reason was that they wanted to build up the rural income. So the rural income, the rural demand, which creates the necessity for the industrial products. And unless that happens, your job creation becomes a huge issue. Today, in industry, when you talk about cost reduction or cost control, it actually means bringing down your labor cost. That is the first target rather than anything else. So commodities, fortunately, of course, that is of course a godsend gift that it has happened, that we have commodity prices going down. But we are not in a position to take advantage of that situation because we do not have the skilled labor at our disposal at all. So, and infrastructure, as I said earlier on, that we are at a very bare minimal stage. We do not have the infrastructure to carry us forward. Finance, unfortunately, when you look at finance, the equity market is a very small market in this country. We actually look at the banks, and we are only looking at the banks and financial institutions for our finance. So when that happens, obviously the leveraging goes up. When the leveraging goes up and there's a downturn in the economy, you are hit. And that hit is you're not able to absorb at this stage of time. And one point which I wanted to make here was that when you look at ease of doing business, which World Bank talks about, and they put us at about 130 now from 158. But unfortunately, this kind of the way the calculation done here is a little flawed in the sense that they look at only Delhi and Mumbai as industrial, which are not industrial hubs at all. And if you look at the statistics of these two places and then you compute that it doesn't really work that way. What is important here is that if I want to start a business today, on an average, 12.2% of my capital goes into starting the business.
Indeed.
Now, if I do that, then I'm losing out on that kind of money. How do I do the value addition subsequently if that cost is so high?
Right.
So that is a point I think the government needs to address. And not look at what World Bank is saying, that ease of doing business is such and such. Yes, obviously we must keep that in mind. I'm not saying that we should totally lose sight of that. But the fact remains that if my capital is going to be withered away before I start my business, how do I build up my capital? Because my capital, unfortunately, is very scarce. I do not have the financial capital with me.
You know, I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to get closing comments from my guests, or from all my guests, so starting with you, Subhomoy. What's the way forward? What do we look at going into the future as far as Make in India is concerned?
Well, I think there are quite a few interesting building blocks already in place. And it'll be good if industry looks at actually the ones which are being touted for India. You know, it's no point saying that I'll enter a sector where the government hasn't particularly talked about. But I don't see much of investment ideas coming into Sanitation India, that's Clean India, or ideas like even the Make in India's basic building block of telecom sector.
Indeed.
You know, so I would think that is where the action needs to be from business in India.
And Professor Bhanumurthy, closing comments from you.
Well, I think there are three issues. One is
very quickly. If you can
one is I think R&D investment. I think we have not really discussed much. You'll be surprised to know that we only spend 0.8% of GDP on R&D investment.
Yes.
And if you want to have this 9% increase in the share of manufacturing, you have to increase this R&D also. Rather, you have to double. And the other one is on the financial sector. I mean, I think we still have one of the countries which have highest transaction cost in the financial markets. I think we have to really go for much more financial sector reforms, and the bankruptcy. I think we are getting into the bankruptcy code. Once it comes, I think we will see some improvement in the doing business.
All right. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you so much, Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, also with us on the program, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy and S.K. Sarkar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.